This is The Mud Peddlers, a podcast where two nerdy ceramic artists share the behind the scenes of their worlds of clay. We are your hosts, Lindsey M Dillon.
And I am Donte of Earth Nation.
This week on The Mud Peddlers, we are checking in with our Patreon because both Donte and I have had our Patreon for a while.
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be kind of interesting to talk about like what we've learned from our experience running a Patreon so far, and just kind of what we think about doing with it in the future. So, yeah, it's going to be kind of a relaxed episode, some nice reflection, and, yeah.
Yeah, I've had mine for quite some time, and it's taken me a while to really understand how it goes. But Patreon, for me, had kind of like a golden age where it just started. And then a lot of people went to Patreon for, like, essentially privatized work. So it was all kinds of artists, and then there was a different section of it that were essentially sex workers. Realistically.
Oh.
And then OnlyFans came out like a couple years after.
Oh, right.
And so all of them kind of moved over to the more popular platform of OnlyFans.
Yeah.
So most Patreon are either, if it ever gets close to that area, are usually like lewd cosplayers. Mm-hmm. But more so to the left of that are mostly like artisans. Like like
podcasters.
Podcasters, bread makers, usually like it's a maker space essentially.
Yeah.
And then the tiers, of course, you know, you have every tier, but it's been a ride for me, because, like, mine started off, somebody just kind of was like, maybe you should get a Patreon. I was like, what's that? And then, just because I wanted to be the first on the train, I just started it.
Yeah.
And it's been going really well from there.
Speaking of which, listeners, we do have more in-depth episodes on specifically how we set up our Patreons.
Yes.
In earlier episodes, but have you changed your tiers since you started? Like...
Yeah, I've changed my tiers quite a bit. So, like, my first tier, and it's all monetary. Mm-hmm. So my first tier is like a $2 one, there's a $5 one, there's a 10. I think there's a 20, 25, and there's a 30 is like the top one.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay.
30 is probably as high as I'll go.
So you do 20, 25, you like break it up into those smaller amounts?
Well, the two, yeah, I break it up into smaller amounts. The $2 one is like if you want a shout out on the channel, number one. So if you're a business just trying to get your name out there and you want your name on screen.
Yeah.
Right? Or if you just want to support me in general for like half of what it costs to get a cup of Starbucks coffee every single month, right?
Yeah,
like
or a third these days.
A third, right? And that's like once a month. And the $5 tier is like, you get put on a list, and of that list, I send you a piece once your time comes. Mm-hmm. Granted, if I have too many patrons, sometimes it takes like 8 months to a year to get to that piece to you.
Yeah.
So I try and make it really clear to patrons who get into that tier that, like, if you want a piece of my work, it's more monetarily and time valuable for you to just buy a piece from me.
Yeah. This is kind of more like, hey, I want to support your work and eventually get something from you.
Exactly. Yeah. So some people are like, I've been supporting you for a year and a half and I only got one piece. And I'm like, well, you got your piece already.
Yeah.
Like, at this point, you're getting all the other content that comes with it.
Yeah.
So I think the $2 tier gets like pictures that normal people don't get. Mm-hmm. But every tier above that gets the stuff before that, including what they also get. So like,
yeah.
$2 tier gets a shout out and pictures, and the $5 tier gets shout out, pictures, and then work every now and then.
Yes.
Right, and then the $10 tier is like, most of the time I make a YouTube video, if I do it a couple days early, you get YouTube content before anybody else does.
Yeah.
On top of all the stuff the $2 and $5 tier gets.
Right.
And then 20 is, stuff like that. It keeps going.
Yeah.
The $30 tier is like, you get everything, including like cringy old videos that I've locked away.
Oh my gosh.
I've locked away like 12 or 20 videos or something like that.
Have you changed at any point in a major way, like what those tiers include?
No, I've changed the clarification on them a lot. I used to have one tier that was like a weekly live cast, but it turns out to be easier to set up and more viable for me personally to do a live cast for everyone and have my patrons be included.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because like if I did a cast just for my patrons,
the
Patreon is kind of like a gym membership to a lot of people. They sign up, they don't go though.
Yeah.
Right? So out of like the 200 patrons that I have, only 100 of them actually support me on a monetary value, because there's like a free tier.
Oh, right.
Which I'll talk about later.
Yeah.
And then of them, there's maybe like 10 or maybe even 15 people who actually pay attention to the extra content I give them. Like if you supported me on Patreon, you just completely forgot about it. Patreon usually takes you off after a while.
Oh, really?
Because if you attach it to your card, you're not attaching it to your bank.
Oh, yeah.
And after like
a couple years,
years,
your card goes
expires.
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes, and I know I'm going off in directions here. Sometimes people are like, yeah, I gave you $10 and I didn't get any content, and I'm like, well, your thing expired like 4 months ago, so that would explain why you haven't gotten content for 4 months.
Yeah.
And like, oh, my bad,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a good ride.
Yeah, I've changed. I haven't changed a lot. So I started my Patreon
Not too long ago.
Not
right?
that long ago. Yeah, like I think I'm on maybe year 3 or something like that. Yeah, I think I'm on year 2 or 3, and I haven't really. I guess the main thing that I changed is, so originally I had, so I still have my tiers are the same. I have 3 tiers. I've got a $3 tier, a $7 tier, and a $13 tier.
Do you name them? You name them. How do you name yours? Because I name mine weird too.
Yeah, I name mine. So the $3 tier is the House of Earth.
Okay.
The $7 tier is the House of Stone, and the $13 tier is the House of Flame.
So you do like a fantasy type.
Yeah. Because I I mean, I'm a Hogwarts bitch.
I mean,
like, I like the idea of houses and that I mean, it's very on brand for me, right?
We're millennials. The chances that we would subscribe to a Hogwarts type / like pseudo astrology type thing is much higher than like other,
although astrology is, from what I understand, is big with the Zoomers, but I don't know.
It is big with Zoomers.
Yeah.
Zoomers and Zoomers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have those 3 tiers, and I think the biggest thing that's changed is so initially the $3 tier got access to only some of the like extra content that I posted.
Right.
And then eventually I was like, I'm gonna what did I do differently? Oh yeah. What I ended up changing, gosh, it's kind of funny because again, it's like in some ways Patreon is such like a back burner thing that like I don't it's not like a thing that I think about on like a day-to-day basis. But the biggest thing was that eventually I made it so that the $3 tier gets access to all of the behind the scenes content, and then I think that's maybe when I started the Night Peddlers. Yes, which so that oh gosh, it's so fun. Anyway, so that's the biggest thing that's changed. Is essentially at one point the $3 tier only got access to some, and now they get access to everything. And I kind of like that because whenever I write things, and I guess that's another thing that's changed over the years, is that so the content that I post, I think initially I was really worried that people were not going to feel like they were getting their money's worth. And so my initial plan was like, oh, I should be posting something to Patreon like every week.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
I try and spoil mine.
See, that's good. I don't. I mean, how to say? Like, I think I recognize that, like, the whole, like, gym membership dynamic.
Yeah.
So I try not to go, too long without posting something that everyone can see.
Yeah.
But I also keep in mind that, we're doing the Night Peddlers. So if you're at the $7 or $13 tier, you get the whole ass other podcast episode.
Right.
And then the $13 tier that's the one where I send a monthly newsletter update.
I remember
and then a little goodie. Now that actually has changed, I guess, a fair amount over the last couple years.
How so?
When I was initially doing those letters, I kind of modeled them a bit after what Birdie Tam does for her Patreon, which, by the way, if you like cute animals and plants and nice colors and stuff, you should go look at Birdie Tam's art. We've had her on the podcast. Shout out to Birdie Tam. She's awesome. Love her work. So I was kind of modeling it after Birdie Tam, where it's like kind of, short, sweet, has some really, has some fun, interesting, like, behind the scenes information about, like, what's going on in my personal life, what I'm doing in the studio, what I'm doing at home. I mean, I wasn't modeling it, like, exactly because I didn't want to be, like, straight up copying what Birdie does, but I really
something.
Yeah, like, I like the way that she structures it.
Yeah.
So that has changed because I tend to now actually put more time into making what I write more elaborate. Like, before, the word count was I don't know. I mean, it would take up like a quarter of a page on a Word document.
Okay.
So it was kind of like short, sweet. Here's what I'm doing in the studio.
Paragraph.
Here's what I'm doing in at home, and then here's like another like little extra thing. Is kind of how I would talk about it. Now I sort of pick a topic, and like a topic that's relevant to like kind of what I've been thinking about during the month, and diving into it more deeply.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest things that having the Patreon has changed for me over the last couple years is I feel a lot more confident in my writing.
Okay.
Like, because I used to love writing in high school, right? Like I used to carry around a notebook and just kind of like write stuff.
You would.
Yeah, of course I would. I was definitely that person.
Yeah.
But after college and after like since I didn't get like my degree in writing, I felt really self-conscious about my ability to write and I was really out of practice. But I feel like over the past couple years, the writing that I've done both for my $13 House of Flame tier and also the writing that I've done for like my anyone who subscribes to my Patreon, I feel like my writing has developed a lot over the last couple of years. And not to say that I'm like some writing genius now, God no, but like I can see the improvement from when I first started. But I tend to do slightly smaller updates now on my postings that everybody can read. Like if you subscribe and pay any money at all, like $3 tier and up, I tend to do smaller, more like, well, a combination of smaller, more bite-sized updates. Like, hey, here's a series of new designs that I just came up with, and a little blurb about that, as opposed to here's a topic and now I'm gonna write 2.5 pages worth of stuff.
Right.
So it's a little bit more mixed now. But I think also seeing that people seem to be enjoying like the Night Peddlers, like people will comment on that on the Patreon episodes. It's like, okay, like I feel like like a lot of the people who have subscribed to Patreon have been with me kind of from the beginning, which I'm like super honored that people want to
seriously
consistently contribute like that.
I have people that have been there for like 2 years. That's and
amazing.
There's an option to say, there's an option for mine, because anywhere past the second tier, you basically get a gift of some sort sooner or later.
Yeah.
There's an option on mine to say that you don't want anything from me, you just want to support me. And so I have a big list. Every month I go through the list and I send out 4 packages to 4 of my patrons' houses. And sometimes I look at people's names and I don't know if they clicked the button yet or not to say I don't want a gift. So I'll pick somebody's name, let's just say like John Doe. Yeah. And I'll go in there and their address just won't be there. Oh. And then I'll check their preferences, and their preferences like they don't want anything. They just want to give me $5 a month. Yeah. Right. And I'm like, oh, that's really sweet. And they've just been there those people have been there forever. Bless. They've been, Yeah. Like, and for some people that's a lot. For some people it's not a lot, but for some people like $5 is. Yeah. You know what I mean? $5 will get you to work and back in a day. You know? Depending on where you live, of course. Yeah. I mean, I think especially too with like, cause the thing that I've realized with like my Patreon, I mean, like more, not me as a Patreon creator, but as someone who also supports others on Patreon. Oh yeah. It's so easy to do like a $5 subscription here, a $5 subscription there. And like all of a sudden forget about it.
Yeah. And then you realize that you're paying like a not insignificant amount to Patreon every month. Right. And so that $5 is like, it's appreciated because it's really easy to be like, eventually you got to cut back somewhere. And like, I've had to do that a few different times. Like what I tend to do with like, if I'm looking at my finances and I'm like, all right, I got to kind of reduce a little bit here and there is I tend to stay with the Patreon accounts that have fewer people. Yes. Like, so there's because
they need more support.
Yeah. They need more support. Yeah. Like there's some big name, like, what is it? Like Last Podcast on the Left, I used to support them on Patreon, but they have thousands and thousands. Yeah. So eventually I was like, all right, like I need to trim the fat somewhere. Let me, I can cut that. But that's just kind of all to say that like those $5 are not insignificant. And
no, absolutely not. Yeah. No, those that's probably most of my subscribers actually of Patreon. And I think for a while, to kind of go back to the tiers and how they've changed, thing is, at a certain tier, I used to make extra episodes for my patrons. Yeah. But then I realized, like, only 2 of them are watching the episodes. Yeah. Right? So I would and editing videos takes a long time. Like, gaining the skill takes a long time. And not only that, to record it takes a long time. And then to edit it, and then to produce it, and then put it on a file where no one else can access it except for unlisted. Like, there's a special thing it goes to, right? Right. So to do all that, and then have, like, 2 entire work days for a video that 2 people watch is crazy. Yeah. Right? And I used to love doing them, but then I was basically making an extra YouTube video for these people. Yeah. Which is fine, but they're not, I don't have like a team of editors. It's just me and then somebody spell checks my stuff. Yeah. Yeah. I have I don't know, for those of you who do watch the YouTube channel, and you're listening to this right now, if you ever see like a swipe, an artistic swipe with letters on top of it, that's usually my word checking person. Right? But if you ever see just like little data points or like random floating words, that's just me adding stuff in. Oh. Does that make sense? So I use a completely different text than the person who looks over my stuff does.
Oh, okay.
Does that
Okay.
make
Oh,
sense?
interesting. Yeah.
So sometimes...
Is that so that you can tell what you've added and what they've added?
Yes. It's also
okay.
for the viewer, even though the viewer doesn't really recognize it that way.
Yeah.
So, like, if she adds stuff,
Mm-hmm.
she'd be like, Dante's doing this. But to the average person, I think they think I'm talking about myself in the third person.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
But really, it's someone else is adding it.
Yeah.
So sometimes the context is off.
And is this for, like, when you're, like, is this text that shows up on screen?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
okay.
and you'll notice it's like a swipe and then words there, but mine's just like words floating.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
Right, and so I will say for quite some time I changed the hell out of one tier, and I was putting so much work into it. But realistically, they just want to look into the non-average things that happen.
Yeah.
Like if my kill mode is ready to fire, and I'm not telling Instagram or Facebook or YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
my patrons get to know that,
Mm-hmm.
so they know that stuff's coming.
Yeah.
There's also a tier, the me first tier, that gets like first dibs.
Oh, yeah.
So I tell them when my store update is happening before, like 3 days before everybody else.
Right.
So if like cups are gone and I'm like, oh, I just released a store update, it's probably them who've picked it off. Because they're really the majority buyers in most cases for me.
Yeah.
Right? The average person might have a cup from me or a plate or a bowl, but my patrons are like, I want a collection of your stuff in my cabinet.
Yeah.
Because they like me and they support me so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and this is just me kind of ranting on this, I think from their point of view, they're supporting a system that has in turn supported them at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Like I imagine you supported last podcast on the left because you enjoyed them and like they gave you information that was valuable to you.
Yeah.
I think people who support me on a certain tier do the same thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And they go, hey, I learned how to center from this video.
Yeah.
So I could shell out $2 a month for you. Like no problem.
Yeah.
Right? And that was in the golden age of Patreon, that was prime. Right? But since then it's changed a little bit.
How do you mean?
Well, they've raised their prices a bit, but
yeah.
I don't get more money. So I've definitely received a couple messages of people who are like, I supported you for $2 a month, and it took $3.30 out of my account, and you're trying to show people, and I'm like, no, that's not me. I'm not getting extra money whatsoever from you. The service is taking more money from you, and they're getting that money. So if you're mad at someone, be mad at them.
Yeah.
I'm a little mad, too. The other thing is that Patreon made a free tier on my thing. I did not make a free tier.
Yeah, no, they add that to everyone's now.
I hate it so much.
Yeah.
Because people will sign up for the free tier and think they're getting free content. And so I actively have to tell people, I didn't make this tier. I don't like it. You get no more content than you do on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube. Like you get, I don't pay attention to that tier at all. You basically get public information.
Yeah.
Right.
I have not really been sure how to respond to that because
I tried to take it off and I can't.
No, you can't. It's what I guess, and again, I've done zero research into this, so this is just my impression.
Yeah.
But I think it's Patreon's attempt to make Patreon a bit more of like any other social media platform.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of why that is. And what I've thought about doing is, essentially taking the content that I would normally post to Instagram and just additionally posting it to Patreon.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure, I mean, again, it's like, because all that requires extra work. And I do feel like that's the biggest learning curve with Patreon, I think, is figuring out, where the juice is worth the squeeze.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that, like, again, for listeners who are either, thinking about reevaluating their Patreon or thinking about making a Patreon, like, I think that's the biggest thing that, like, is hard to figure out. And I think it is, I don't know, like, because considering that there's like the free tier and like there are so many different ways that you could put 150% into your Patreon.
Right.
But, again, figuring out, all right, how much are you actually getting back out of that? So like if you were...
And then 2 of them watch the video.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I'm putting 150% into 2 people.
Yeah.
Out of the 100 people that... Yeah, I get what you're saying.
I feel like... I have a couple different thoughts about how to approach that problem solving.
I'm just mad that it exists, really.
Yeah, no,
like,
I mean...
Why do I have to solve another problem that I didn't create? If I created the problem myself, it's a punishment mechanic, so I can learn from it. But if Patreon puts it on you, and you gotta solve the problem...
And you're just like, well...
I'm just dealing with someone else's problem at this point.
Yeah.
And it's just affecting me, which is unfair.
Yeah. What I kind of think is that... I think if your primary thing with Patreon is just kind of about, like, the money aspect of it, which I think, largely speaking, it is, I think it's better to start out with, like, a little less and then build up.
Right.
Because I think I mean, the thing is, like, I say that, but that's totally not what I did.
No,
like,
me either.
I'm more inclined to, like, I'm gonna give you too much,
yes,
and then realize where I need to cut back.
Absolutely, I do the same thing.
Yeah, but I feel like it's smarter to, like, start out with a little less and say, hey, like, I'm just starting out. I want to add more things eventually, so that way people can kind of, you know, get the sense that they're going to be getting things, because that's like. My biggest concern, largely speaking, is that, like, if people are paying money to me, I want to make sure that they're getting something out of it.
Absolutely.
But I think that's probably more to do with my insecurity than it is about how people actually use Patreon.
No, I think that's a valuable point of view, actually. Like, I think people are paying you for a specific thing. They're paying you for more content, so you want to make sure that content is quality. I was in the same exact place you were in right now. And I get it. But, like, I think you're right in the sense that, like, if I give all the content I can at the $5 tier, I don't have any content left for the other tiers to grow on. Right. So, and then what happened is I spread that content out amongst the other tiers. And then the tier that I was giving all the content to was pissed because they're like, I used to get all this stuff for supporting you for this amount, and now I'm not. I feel like I'm getting a little bit scammed here, right? Like, but that's not what you're trying to do.
Right. And I don't think I've ever... I mean, I've only had a couple people, like, actively unsubscribe from my Patreon, so I'm inclined to think that people feel good about what they're getting. I've never had someone be like, hey, you're scamming me out of stuff. Like, I thought I was going to be getting more.
I had one person, that's about it.
Yeah, and after, you know, with how many people subscribe to your Patreon, it's like, that's not...
To be fair, I have about 220-something people that subscribe to my Patreon, but 100 of them are free tier people.
Yeah, but at least, the thing that's nice about that, though, is that, like, what I do feel like the benefit of the free tier could be is that it is one step closer. Like, someone who's been following you on Instagram, if they go to Patreon and they subscribe to your free tier, they are one step closer to subscribing to your paid tier.
I guess, but it's the amount of traffic that goes to Instagram and Facebook is so little that the amount of content I give to the free and it's the same content. There's just way less eyes on it. So it's like, if you just followed me on Instagram, you're getting the same exact thing as you would have gotten on the free tier. It's just one URL over.
Yes.
Which I guess is valuable if you didn't know I had a Patreon. But after you know I have a Patreon, you're like, well, why am I here at the free tier?
Yeah.
It doesn't give me anything for this.
I mean,
I could have went to Instagram.
Unless Patreon is trying to get people on Patreon the way that people are on Instagram.
That's
which I think is which is what I'm inclined to think. Again, I don't know, but I will say, I think the thing that can make Patreon helpful if you are, and, like, you know, again, talking about giving 150%.
Right.
Like, I give probably more than is, like, monetarily worth, like, the however much money I get. I mean, I get about $200 a month from Patreon.
That's pretty good, though.
I give a lot, and at about half of my patrons are subscribed to the $13 tier, and I put a lot into that $13 tier, probably more than, like, I could quote unquote get away with.
Yeah.
But again, for me, Patreon was not just about the money. Patreon for me is also a tool to have external pressure for me to push my own growth. And for example, like, I wanted to improve my writing. I wasn't really doing that on my own. Patreon provided a place for me to say, hey, if I'm going to be working on my writing, like, here's an audience for it. And they're also giving me money.
Absolutely. Like, there are people who want in-depth versions of your work.
Yeah.
Which I love.
Yeah.
To be honest.
That's what I find it helpful for. Also, like, when I was doing, for a while, I also really wanted to work on, like, my drawing skills. And I was part of a little, not publicly posting drawing club for a little while, but, you know, like so many drawing clubs that eventually fell apart. But what I ended up doing with Patreon for a while is making individually hand-drawn, hand-painted little bookmarks. And that was, like, those took me, like, 6 hours to make. Like, way more than I was getting back, like, money-wise. But I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And it was fun, and it felt like, you know, again, it's like, so I think for those who find external pressures helpful for, like, meeting deadlines or, like, pushing themselves, I think Patreon can be really helpful that way, in addition to what it can bring in monetarily. So in that question of, like, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah.
I think that's, like, something else to also keep in mind is, like, Patreon doesn't have to be just about the money. It can be about an extra way to push yourself.
Realistically, although the money really helps, it's for me, it's, like, not... It's about 50% worth the money. No, worth is the wrong idea. The idealism behind it. Because, like, realistically, I have my own little group of people that really like my stuff. and I give them videos, and they're really responsive. Like, I have about 4 or 5 people on my Patreon who are there every single post.
Oh, that's awesome.
Right? Yeah, and they're just, like, they're on my work, and I have one person loves so much, I won't say their name. They're like, I'll release a little video talking about, like, okay, guys, talc is going to go out of style pretty soon. We're moving to Simbar talc. Here's the chemistry for it. And she's like, I don't know what this means, but I enjoy it.
That's sweet. I love that.
The fact that she, I actually don't know if it's a she, that they respond in that factor is like, okay, so I'm glad that you enjoyed that I'm bringing you that. But I'm not telling the average person about, like, I don't.
So what in general, like, do you post on your Patreon? Because, like, because you talked about the videos, the extra YouTube videos, like, not really being worth your time. So
I have so many of them. I have like 12, and if you subscribe to that tier, I post them somewhere so you'll see them.
Okay.
But then, like,
so, like,
I
the
don't
video,
make more.
so you don't. Okay, so you have like the 12 that people just get because you've already made them.
Yes.
And then so now, like, for the most part,
every tier gets what the previous tier gets.
Yeah.
On top of something extra. So, for example...
Wait, so I mean, like, what are you posting, though? Like, on Patreon, for the most part?
Right. So, for example, I have one tier called the Glaze Chemist tier, and it's for people who know how to make their own glazes.
Oh, okay.
So, if I develop a new glaze, unless it's a privatized glaze, I'm posting the specific gravity, the milliliters of water, the materials I used, why I use the materials, along with a page-long, essentially, blog about how I developed this glaze on top of the recipe and how it's used on white and brown clay. If you're part of that tier, you're essentially getting glazes handed to you that I make.
Or that's separate from the blog that you have on your website that's free access.
Yeah, most of the time on my blog, I don't post the recipe, or if I do, you're getting less information.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So, like, here's a good example. I'm moving to Simbar talk pretty soon, as you know. I've already told you, right?
Yeah.
People on my Patreon are probably going to know why I moved to Simbar talk.
Yeah.
But, like, unless you follow me really closely on Glazy, you're going to have no idea why. So when I post a recipe, even if it's on Glazy for free or on my blog, if I did post the recipe, you're going to be like, Simbar Talk, what the is that? And why is he using it? And where do I get it? If you're a patron, you know why I'm using it.
Yeah.
You know where I got the chemical analysis. You know where to buy it from. You get more information, even if I did give people, which I usually don't, the same information you're getting.
Yeah. Okay, that right? Makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, when I get home, I'm probably going to post something about water solubility on that tier, and then I'm also probably going to post it on my blog. Problem is, patrons are going to get it first of that tier. My blogs, they're going to get it like in a month or so. And of them, the patrons are going to get like a half a page long explanation as to what's going on there. But, like, my blog is just going to be like
a little like blurb.
A little blurb. It's going to be like, they don't get the same information, right? And that information is, to someone like me, really useful. Yeah. So for people who are glaze makers and they've always wondered things and they want proof, because I try and flesh out my ideas on my blog and Patreon, they will actively see what's going on and why it's happening and how it can help the efficacy of their glazes at a later time. Yeah. Okay, right? That makes sense. That's really important to me. Like, I have one coming up. It's a blog. I have one coming up that I will make public, not of that tier, about the amount of alumina and silica and how it affects the efficiency of your glaze, because I talk a lot about that. That's going to be public. Okay. But, like, Patreon probably already has it. Like, they probably already know. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Stuff like that.
That kind of reminds me of, and I may have already said this on the last episode that we did talking about, like, Patreon. There's this phrase, because, like, I think one of the biggest things that I struggled with is, like, kind of like that, like, you have a system for, like, okay, what do the public people get, and what do the Patreons get, and then what do the top tier Patreons get? Right. You know, and that was something that I really, really struggled with when I was making my Patreon, and to some degree still do, just because it's like, because there's a part of me that wants to, like, share all the things, to get all the information out there. Right. But also, like, I don't know, like, that's, you know, not everybody wants that. And I think, I don't know, there's just, then that would also kind of negate the purpose of a Patreon. Like, right. Like, some people would kind of subscribe anyway, but some people subscribe because they want to support, but also they want some benefits. So this metaphor that one of my, friend of mine talked about doing is essentially treating different layers of, like, what's public and what's on Patreon as, like, if you, like, let's say you ran into your neighbor on the sidewalk, right? You're in the neighborhood. You run into your neighbor. You like your neighbor, right? You're chatting on the sidewalk. That's, like, the public profile of Instagram, right? Yeah. And then the intro level tier is like, oh, hey, like, come hang in the backyard, like, let me get you, like, a glass of wine or whatever. That's like the intro Patreon. But then, like, the top tier Patreon is when you're like, oh, hey, like, let's go inside and let's watch a movie or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Let's Netflix and chill. No.
Whoa!
No.
Lindsay!
No. Not like that. Not like that.
Crunchyroll and chill.
Crunchyroll and chill.
Ooh.
Crunchyroll and boba.
Crunchyroll and boba.
Yeah. Oh no. Oh Lord. That might be bleeped out. We'll see.
Someone's laughing really hard at that right now.
I hope so.
And then there's a group of people who are like, what's boba? And they're gonna have to look it up.
I think boba's pretty. I'm actually very happy that boba's way more like popular now. There was one place I knew where to get boba in high school, and when they closed down, I was like, oh no more boba. And now I'm like, this is everywhere. It's great.
Well, also, and this is just a side venture, right?
Yeah.
You and I are somewhat privileged in the fact that Sacramento has a pretty heavy Asian immigration population.
Yeah.
So like we have a lot more
choices.
Like we have a lot more. Like the amount of like I want to say Hmong, and I think it's Hmong and something else. People that we have here.
Yeah.
Is in like the neighborhood I used to live in, Little Saigon. Just everything with boba all the time. So I thought it was super normal. And then I get out of Sacramento and I'm like, oh, so I have to look for boba. I have to go out of my way to find it. But now it's super popular. We have like 4 different chains here.
Yeah. And then a number of like smaller locally owned things too. Yeah, it's great. It's great. Bless. Right. Anyway, that's the metaphor of like, what information do you share with who? Again, like since writing is kind of a big part of why I do the Patreon is like I really enjoy working on my writing skills, both like creative writing and like nonfiction writing. Like if I'm writing about like a business decision I've made or something like that, like it's kind of like, all right, the more personal it is, the like that's going to be Patreon versus and then of course the $13 House of Flame members get like if there's something that I'm even like not ready to share with the like all of my patrons, like I'm gonna tell the top tier patrons first.
What I've been doing recently is I've just been taking quick videos because Patreon doesn't allow you to put videos on there unless you upload the video itself onto like
YouTube,
something like that. Yeah. For more than like 2 minutes, right? So
because they had like this thing called Lens for a while, right?
They did, and I loved it.
Yeah, did they take that? Is that gone?
It didn't work at like I have an Android, so it didn't work on Android, and so.
And that was like their version of like Instagram stories, basically.
And the quality was real low. It's more worth it to just upload a video to the website and then do it in parts. And you can't upload. I'm making Patreon sound like right now. Sorry. And you can't load multiple videos. So if I make a 3-part video and they're each a minute and a half long, I have to do it in 3 separate posts.
Ooh.
I can't unless I go edit the video somewhere else and clip them all into one thing and then load it on YouTube and then give the link. Like it's really difficult. Patreon. I'm about to go off. Patreon turns you into like a second-class citizen if you're not on a computer. First of all,
yeah. So there's
if I'm looking up your name and your address to send you something on my Patreon, I have to go on my computer. I can't look it up on my phone. I can't see your name on my phone. I can only do messages and see certain contacts. And of that, every time I post, I think their servers are so cheeks that like 4 of the posts that I did last month are still loading. I'll show it to you. Yeah. So
I think you would. I think you're gonna have to repost those, my dude, because I don't think those are loading.
I can. I deleted the videos.
No.
So what happens is I post it, and Patreon goes, "I posted it," and then I go back, and it's like we're still loading, and then I go down my feed, and I'm like, "Bro, I deleted that like 3 days ago. I'm not keeping stuff I don't need."
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things that Patreon could be doing to be a better service. Like, I mean, I think it's still worth it to have a Patreon.
Absolutely.
Because like I was even thinking about like, because again, when I was initially doing research, being like, oh, like what are the fees that Patreon has? And Patreon's got some fees.
Patreon do got some fees.
Yeah, but I feel like Patreon is like the Etsy of the subscriber world.
Agreed.
Because it's like everyone knows what it is.
Yep.
It has like a structure so that if something gets messed up, they have someone they can go to complain to.
Right.
Whereas like, because there's a podcast that I listen to, the Myths and Legends podcast, and they have a subscriber thing on their website, so they don't go through Patreon. So all of their like fees, like I think they still get charged some degree of. I imagine they get charged some degree of fees, like from their website hosting.
Yes.
But I imagine it's less than
how much
how much they're getting on, or how much they're having to pay through Patreon. But everybody knows what Patreon is. So when I was initially looking at those fees and like Cody and I were talking, I was like, oh my God, babe, like these fees on Patreon seem crazy high.
It is crazy high.
Yeah.
And they've upped them since the initiation of Patreon.
Yeah. And I'm kind of like, do I want to keep doing this? But Cody was very much like, nah, everybody knows like what Patreon is. Like, you're going to have a lot easier of a time getting people to sign up for Patreon than getting people to sign up for your, like through something on your website.
Well, yeah, because
but I mean, but I don't know. Maybe that will change at some point.
No,
but...
I think you're right, and I think it's purely a foot traffic perception, right? So like in my mind, and this is just the way I've kind of viewed it from its inception, right? Is there was Patreon, and everybody was on Patreon because it was one of the first.
Yeah.
Right, and then people were like, well, a lot of y'all are just kind of making porn, which is fine, but. Like
they clamped down on that.
They clamped down on it, and then OnlyFans was like, we're not gonna clamp down on it. So all the people that were paying money to creators to get lewd or nude content on Patreon moved over to OnlyFans, and that's a very large portion. It's an extremely large portion of people.
I mean, but that doesn't really impact us though, because we're not like that's not the content that we produce.
It doesn't impact our content, but it impacts.
Oh, like how much people see Patreon as like the place to go versus OnlyFans for that kind of content, or like, what is it, Ko-fi or Ko-fi?
Yeah.
Is another one that I hear sometimes.
That's not only that, you make two excellent points, but also like Patreon now has less funding to put into the service of Patreon. So when their servers and their employees like don't have the time or aren't getting paid enough, or they just don't have enough employees to put out fires, or there's something wrong with Patreon,
or there's things that they could, because it just seems like there's a lot of basic stuff that they could improve. But also, I'm not on the back end of that. But I hear what you're saying.
I'm so sure OnlyFans has way more, and I'm not trying to OnlyFans, but I'm just saying, like, I'm so sure they make so much more money than Patreon that, like, they probably have a lot better support, employees, things of that nature.
One thing that's interesting, though, about OnlyFans is because, like, I like researching, so I was like, how does this work, right? So the only downside about something like OnlyFans is they don't have a discoverability feed. Like when you go onto Instagram, like you can browse and you can like discover new people. From what I understand, you don't have that on OnlyFans. So if you have an OnlyFans, you have to use another social media site to direct people to your OnlyFans.
That's usually what I've seen.
Yeah, and I think what Patreon is trying to do with that free tier is, again, make Patreon the place, like it makes it so that Patreon doesn't have to be the place that people get sent to. I think they're trying to increase the discoverability factor on Patreon.
I think the old adage of like link in bio, spicy content, like, that's what I've seen. So I think you're right in assuming that people direct their OnlyFans content through other social media avenues. I wouldn't know because I've never been to OnlyFans to the point where like
I haven't either.
I've never like gone there and been like, where's the feed? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I assume you just click the link and it takes you there, or I assume what happens is you go there, you type in a name and it pops up somewhere, which with the search bar.
I honestly don't even have the app on my phone.
But I didn't even know I had an OnlyFans app.
I think there's an app.
I thought it was just a website.
I have no idea.
I know what it is, and I know, like, clearly you can tell by someone's, like, profile, like, who uses it, usually. Like, there's usually, like, the cucumber, emoji just used to be an innocent little cucumber.
It's not a cucumber.
It's not. A peach used to just be a peach.
It's not a peach anymore.
It's not. Emoji of a fan used to just be a fan.
Wait, what's a fan?
OnlyFans.
Oh my god.
And there's a color coding to it, because the OnlyFans thing is, like, I think it's white and blue. So if they put a little circle with blue and white next to a peach next to it.
That's fascinating.
It's pure symbolism.
I love that. Just as, like, a language, that's fascinating.
It's cool, but, like, they also put their link once you click the thing next to that.
Right.
So I've never had to go to OnlyFans and, like, put in anything.
Yeah.
I don't think... I know for me, I have a link in bio, and it leads to my Patreon, but I have a bunch of other links.
Right.
From my .website, com, whatever thing.
Yeah.
But, like, I've never been to Patreon... And please tell me if this is the majority.
Wait, Patreon or...
Patreon.
Okay.
I've never been to Patreon, and tell me this is the majority of people, and I'm just, like, in the minority, and seen I've never gone down a feed of work for patrons. I've almost always, if I went to Patreon, clicked on someone's link in their bio.
Oh, yeah.
And then it leads me directly to their page. I've never been to the homepage, and it's been, like, a feed of Facebook or Instagram scrolling down.
Oh, I have.
Have you? Okay.
Yeah. So they have that feature where it's, from what I remember, it's, like, only your feed is basically the feed of people that you subscribe to.
I see.
Yeah, if you like go on your phone, you like hit the little home button as like if you're not in like the creator mode, if you're in like the, patronizer mode, like your feed is
I don't think they know, but when you log into Patreon, you can log in as a member or as a creator.
Mm-hmm. Member, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah,
that's what Lindsay's talking about.
Yeah,
you have to log in as like a member, and then you can see. But if you're a creator, it's just going to show you the stuff you've posted and your finances. And
yeah. Okay, so one other thing, and this is just kind of a shorter question. Like, I know you used to also do a thing on your Patreon where you would have like essentially like a one-on-one meeting with people.
That still exists.
Oh, that still exists. Okay.
Yeah, there's a certain tier where if you want my personal advice and you have a problem and you're trying to really mash it out, because you're a patron of a certain tier, I'll just sit with you for as long as you need to figure out the problem.
Dang.
Yeah.
That's
like,
very generous.
And granted, it's not like 3 hours a day. It's just like...
Yeah.
I think it's the $20 tier is like, you have a direct line to me. Like, it's not like you're in my Instagram DMs and we're sharing memes.
Right.
It's like, hey, Donte, my glaze changed. I have a problem. I need to figure out what the problem is.
Yeah.
Right? I had someone last week that was like, hey, Gerstly borate is done. I don't have any more of it. But my glaze takes a lot of boron. I don't have the knowledge. I'd have never taken glaze chemistry classes. Can you reformulate this for me? And I was like, yeah, give me the recipe. Give me 20 minutes. You're probably going to have to do some testing on your side to see if it's going to work. If it's going to work.
This is like the framework of how you can do this.
Yeah, like I'm not going to fire it for you.
Yeah.
But, they gave me all the chemistry. I said, I'm going to put it into a calculator. I'm going to give it back to you. This is your new recipe. Right? But without this ingredient. 2 weeks later, she was like, thank you. It worked.
Oh,
nice. Thank you so much. And that's what that tier essentially buys you.
Okay. I got
Is that like, hey, Donte, my kiln's acting up. Okay, give me a picture of your kiln. Give me a picture of your elements. Let's see. Because half the time, it's like their elements are
yeah.
Or it's like their thermocouple's bad and they need to change it. And then 2 weeks later, they're like, oh my God.
Everything's fine now.
I bought a new thermocouple, looked up a video on Scott's YouTube channel like you told me to. I changed it out myself. Everything works fine now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, they're just people who don't have the knowledge base to fix the little issues of things that we just learned along the way.
Right.
You know what I mean? One person needed to know what specific gravity was. I sent them my YouTube video. They were like, oh, so my glaze just need to be thicker. I was like, yeah, but it's less about water content. Like little things like that.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Okay, so it's kind of, that's really neat. Okay. Thinking about how there are, again, between not that this is our content, but like OnlyFans, there's like Patreon, there's Ko-fi, there's, Instagram is also...
I hate that I have to use OnlyFans, but it's like the top... OnlyFans is like the most used privatized content Patreon type beat.
Yeah. It's very, very
It's just
popular.
for nudes instead of,
Yeah. There's also, there's a subscriber option now on Instagram. I'm pretty sure there's something like that on TikTok.
Yeah.
Like, so do you feel pretty set with Patreon, or do you think you would, have you ever considered changing and like either having something through your website or something else, or is that not really on the table right now?
I'd say I'm pretty comfortable where well, how do you feel about that kind of stuff? Because like, do you feel comfortable where you're at personally?
Yeah, again, like, because sometimes I, like, 'cause, you know this about me, and probably the listeners do too now by this point, that like, whenever I make a change or whenever I add something to my plate, I do a lot of research, and sometimes there's like, how do I say? I sometimes have some inertia when I'm making changes to things, because it's like, once I learn a system, it's like I don't have to think as hard to implement that system.
Of course.
But changing a system is like, okay, well, you got to learn some new stuff. And sometimes, if I'm like really busy, or if I got other stuff on, that's a higher priority,
it might
like
affect the other systems. And
yeah. So I'm pretty good with Patreon. Like, I think, again, depending on what the fees are, depending on, like, I think if I suddenly had like a really crazy boost in my popularity, I could conceivably go like, well, maybe it would be more worth it to like have something through my website. But for the most part, no. Like, I'm sticking with Patreon. But okay, so I do have another something I can kind of add to that, but that kind of has to do more with like where I see my Patreon going in the future. But I kind of want that to be a different question. But how do you feel about that?
I think
like with sticking with Patreon or like diversifying? Because
I'll say that one of my ecosystems kind of affects the other ecosystem in Patreon. So like the ecosystem of my YouTube directly affects the ecosystem of my Patreon, because one kind of leads to the other.
Yeah, like your YouTube is a funnel to your Patreon.
Right, but they affect each other in the way that the reason why I pay so much attention, especially lately, to my Patreon supporters is because I do a lot of work to make sure that the flow of intellectual artwork and teaching on my YouTube is minimized with the distraction of ads. And I'm probably saying that wrong, right? But like when every 4 years we have this political discourse, and politicians pay a large sum of money to YouTube to have political ads put on other people's channels.
Right.
Okay, I take political ads off. Which means I'm getting less money every 4 years. Oh,
interesting.
I don't get from that pot of money.
Yeah.
But I know that there's a certain amount of people who don't know how the system works, so they assume that if they see a Biden or a Trump ad on my thing, they think because it's my channel, I'm in control of it. So they assume my political alignment.
Yeah.
Realistically, it's just the monetization and how it works, right? So I had to go in, call YouTube and be like, please take that off.
Yeah.
And they did so. Right? I got to go through the list. So if you see ads on my stuff, it's not because I endorse that specific thing. It's just because that's the way the system works.
Right.
Secondarily, I usually take ads off. Actually, not usually. It's set up this way. Every video will ask me if I want mid-roll ads, which means in the middle of watching the episode, I can get ads.
Yeah.
I get more money from that. I don't allow those ever on my channel. I do not have a single video that has ads in the middle of my channel. Would I make double the money if I did? Yes, I would. From YouTube. I only have ads at the beginning and at the end of my YouTube videos. And nobody watches towards the end. So usually, the money that I get is from you watching the first ad all the way through.
Yeah.
On top of that, I don't monetize my chill videos, which are me just throwing in the background with light music, because I want the stream of artistic consciousness to go all the way through without interruption. I want the flow of energy to be constant. I want you to be relaxed. Yeah. I want it to be like me in the background. You should be able to put my throwing list on with no ads and leave it on to just chill in the background the entire time. I get no money from doing that. Right? And on top of that, almost every ad that I get of somebody in my DMs who's asking, hey, if you put this on screen, we'll give you money. I say no to almost all of them unless they're like Clayscapes, Mako, Amico, something that I use personally. Like, I did one for Manscaped at one point, and I was like, I use Manscaped.
That's great.
But the reason I name all these things is because I'm a little bit more community-based on my YouTube channel than I am monetary-based, to such a point that I do a lot of work to make sure that the monetization of my channel does not get in the way of your artistic process. And that's important because I think that goes to the quality of the channel. And if the quality of the channel is good and people are learning, then they go to my Patreon, where that counts way more than the monetization from ads.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Those
two ecosystems affect each other massively.
That's a really good point. And that kind of actually, that makes me think about like the question of advertising for our Patreon. Because like I noticed several episodes ago, I mentioned the Lindsey M Dillon Patreon, and when that episode released, I got like 2 new patrons. Yes. And that's like the most kind of direct advertising I'd done for my Patreon in a while. Because I mean, you know, if you ever listen to the end of the episodes, of course I say like, yeah, you can support the show on patreon.com/Lindsey M Dillon. Right. But like, I don't talk about my Patreon that much, but I do notice that like, hey, every now and then, when I do bring it up more, I tend to get new patrons. So how has your advertising for Patreon changed over the years?
It's essentially the same as yours. Like, I try really hard not to bug people. Listen, I'm about to tilt me. I'm tilting myself. Hold on. No.
You're tilting yourself?
I'm tilting myself. You ever seen that meme that's like, here's my room. You'll notice there are many controllers broken and many chairs knocked over because I get so tilted at the towers.
At the what?
It's like a Fortnite joke. Anyway.
Oh, okay.
There's a place called Tilted Towers.
I get it. Okay.
And Tilted is another. Anyway.
Yeah.
How do I say this? What was the question you just asked?
I was asking, like, how has your advertisement for Patreon changed or stayed the same over the years?
Because I'm so tuned in to outside stimulus, it really, 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 really annoys me when I get ads that have not only nothing to do with me, but because I'm so tuned in to what ads are doing, Like, and I know we've talked about this before. When I see a Downy commercial, I don't think to myself like, oh, they're trying to get me to buy Downy.
Yeah.
What they're doing is they're connecting a certain aspect of my life or safety or security.
Yeah,
and like
with this brand.
Right, they have kids running around and they're happy and their clothes are clean and the contrast is turned up and they're using the best camera and they're like, hey, your kids will be happy if you use our product. That's not true. They're trying to get you to buy something.
Yeah.
And they're connecting it to something that exists outside the fact of just cleaning your damn clothes.
Yes.
Right, so in a way they're trying to, I don't think brainwash is the right word.
I get what you're saying.
Okay. But because I hate ads so much, because I feel like they're slightly trying to manipulate you into buying their product, I try to stay away from ads as much as possible. And because of that, I usually try not to push my Patreon into people's faces as much, because I feel like I'm part of the problem of pushing ads into people's faces. So whenever I may once every 2 weeks I'll post something about my Patreon on Facebook. But you're right.
Yeah.
In that when I say it, people sign up for it.
Yeah.
Right, but I hate ads to the extent that if I make advertisements of myself on my own profiles and things of that nature and own social medias, I see myself as part of the ad problem.
I can see why your brain does that to you.
Do you understand?
Yeah,
like,
no, I do.
I'm very aware that like you're trying to manipulate me into buying something that I don't need. I'm aware of this.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I do feel like advertising for your Patreon is like, I mean, how do I say? I also feel self-conscious about how much I'm pushing my Patreon.
Yeah.
But I don't feel quite as strongly as you do about it, because I kind of think like
so angry.
if people are already on, if people are already looking at my content, it's not a huge step to go from looking at my content to paying to get more of my content.
Right.
As opposed to looking at my content versus getting an ad in the middle of the video for Downy.
Right.
It's like, to me, that feels different.
Right.
I think in general, I want to talk about my Patreon more than I have been, but I want that to go kind of hand in hand with being a little bit more consistent about social media. Cause like, I think to be like honest, I felt pretty burnt out from social media for the last like year.
Yeah, man,
year and a half.
It's just a cluster for me as well.
Yeah. I mean, you're still pretty consistent about it though. Like
I could be more consistent, but
I mean, we all could.
We could all be more consistent.
Yeah.
Like the pages that are like thriving on Instagram are like posting 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And I just come to the realization I'm never going to be that.
Yeah.
Like I'm just not. My brain's not built for it.
Yeah. No.
Nor do I have a team of people who are posting like I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. I think like social media, like anything else, and like Patreon, it's kind of like there's that balance of what juice is worth the squeeze, And I do feel like advertising a little bit more about our own Patreon is that I think that like what I like about specifically how you talked about your ecosystem of content being like you are sacrificing money on your YouTube channel to kind of entice people to go to your Patreon. I do think that connection needs to be, I mean, you do it for the community aspect.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, because of that high quality community contribution, that kind of is like what guides people into your Patreon. I do think that connection sometimes needs to be reinforced, because I think also sometimes, I mean, myself as a consumer, I don't always think about like, oh, I'm watching this content. Oh, I wonder if they have a Patreon. It's kind of only when they say like, oh, and by the way, if you want XYZ, I have a Patreon. And it's nice because, it's short, concise, sweet, but it's also like, hey, I have more, and also you're supporting the creator. So I think, I think that can be good. But I wanted to ask, like, where do we see our Patreon going, in the years? And I think like, to answer that question for myself, I think what I would like is I don't necessarily see a whole lot changing. At some point, I might introduce a higher, like I think it would be nice to have a higher tier item. Like something that was like, hey, if you want to have like an hour-long interview with me or something like that. Like, or kind of like what you do with your, direct line of contact thing. But that can also be tricky because unless there are kind of strong boundaries set up with that, I could see how that could be another thing where I'm just putting in 150, 200% and
for
not
two
really
people.
And just like not really getting a lot out of that. So I think I would like to explore a higher tier. And actually, folks, if you're listening, well, obviously you're listening if you're hearing this, but as a listener, dear listener, if you have suggestions for that, or you have things that you would like, hey, like I would be willing to pay $25 a month for this, let me know what that would be, because I mean, again, I think for me, like, having a Patreon, it, like, I do have some core things that I want to do with my Patreon, which is, you know, again, explore writing, explore creative stuff, you know, kind of show people my thought process in a way that I don't always share online, really. But there is also a back and forth of, like, hey, like, do people want this? Like, you know, I remember a while ago asking, like, hey, Night Peddlers listeners, are you enjoying this? Like, do you want this? Because I can't see analytics on how many people are actually listening to this.
Right.
But then when people kind of were like, no, like, keep doing it, I was like, okay, cool. Like, this is working. Like, and I will say, like, the $7 a month that folks who get the Night Peddlers get, like, I mean, it is only once a month, but it takes a few hours to do.
It does.
You know? So, I don't know. I mean, I think, like, what I will say is working well for Patreon is that it provides that structure and that incentive for me to explore creative projects and to have an audience for it that helps motivate me to actually make progress on those things. I acknowledge that for certain tiers, like, you know, I think beyond just, like, the base tier, I probably put more time into it than I'm necessarily getting out monetary-wise. But I will say that because I'm making some changes to my business model that is going to make how much money I get out of each project a little bit less important. Mm-hmm. And actually, I guess by the time this episode comes out, you already know what that is. But because that's going to be changing, like, I'm kind of okay with me putting in more squeeze than juice, if that makes sense. Or, like, than the juice I'm getting out. But I think what I will say, in general, I would like to do more on my Patreon is, like, post a bit more consistently, because sometimes I'll go, like, a month or two without sharing a whole lot. But then when I do share something, I'll share, like, 3 things in, like, the span of a week and a half. So I think maybe posting things a little bit more consistently, and then also taking the projects, like, I think, you know, it's funny, like, my mom is actually the one who's really pushed this a lot, but I've put a lot of heart and soul into some of the things that I've written on my Patreon, and I think it could be interesting to see whether there would be a market for, like, a little booklet of, like, my reflections from the last couple years and selling it for, like, $5 or something as, like, a little booklet of, like, these are the writings that I have.
I want to do the same thing, but with glaze.
Ooh.
I want to do like a no BS guide on how to make glaze.
Oh.
Because there's. I'm sorry, but like.
No. I mean, I was basically done. Like, that's kind of like that's the basics of what has been working well about my Patreon. Which, again, TLDR. What's been working well is the provided structure, the monthly, the income from it has made a difference. I will say that much.
No, sure. Absolutely.
And then the things that I want to do more of is possibly publishing something for sale for the public based on the writings that I've done. And then, you know, again, like always, making time for more sculptures. And then, so what I want to do is when I start working on more sculptures, really put a lot of effort into showing that progress for those sculptural pieces. Mm-hmm. And the creative writing behind those sculptural pieces on my Patreon, so that people who subscribe to the Patreon, like, get that info, get exclusive info about those sculptures, and get it first.
I think what people see when they see my YouTube and my Patreon, that I must be getting, like, thousands of dollars a month. Like, I'm not. I'm not. Right, and I think if we combine both, no, not even that, right? So, I will say, if you're a patron of mine, the support that you give me matters to such an extent.
Yeah. It's huge.
I just bought clay. We went to IMCO together. I just bought some clay. It was almost $100 for 100 pounds. Mm-hmm. Almost $1 a pound.
Dang. What kind of clay were you buying?
I buy porcelain and dragon fruit, which is just porcelain with extra steps.
Oh, yeah.
Like, and for 100 pounds, right? Granted, I can turn that into material that makes more than $100.
Sure, yeah.
But it's like, stuff's getting expensive out here. Mm. You know what I mean? So it matters a lot. And to that extent, I think because of all the communal things that I do, I take a lot of hit monetarily. And because of it, people kind of assume that, like, oh, he must be making, like, 2 G's extra a month on top of his job. That's not what's happening, right? Yeah. I think if I really monetized everything, I probably could.
I think, honestly, dude, I think you could probably do more of that, and I think people would still subscribe.
I mean,
because like, all these things are, like, things that are gonna help you continue to do what you do and continue to be able to... You know, I don't know. I think there's, like, okay, sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to say this little, like, thing. Social media is free advertising. I think in a lot of ways that has empowered a lot of artists.
100%.
But I think at the same time, the way that the algorithms are set up is that social media companies get a lot of free labor out of artists that doesn't always translate into money. And so to some degree, I think because we are in this system, to deal with the requirements that are asked of us within this system, I think it would still be ethical for you to take more advantage of the ways that you could be getting money, and you still contribute so much to the community that I think people would still feel good about contributing to your Patreon, knowing that you are being able to make more money so that you can keep providing the content that you're making, because you can't do that if you don't have money.
Pay for the new camera from taking money cuts.
Right. And you can't pay for food for Astrid if you're, there's a lot of...
In a very selfish way, I think, like, if you were to watch my YouTube channel as a ceramic artist and someone else's YouTube channel, right, I want you to kind of go to me and then be like, well, it's because he doesn't have like 1,000 effing ads every time I watch an episode, right? Like, it just feels... I watch the episode all the way through, and when I'm done, I leave. Like, I don't get interrupted where I have to push... You have a touch screen, you have to push the skip ad button. Like, that doesn't happen on my channel other than the very first initial part, right? And the only reason I say it is because I don't think people notice that I do this until I say it. Like, once I say it, they're like, oh, I noticed that. Yeah. But beforehand, they're like, oh, I thought you just did what everybody else did. I don't.
Dude, maybe that's part of it then. Maybe it's like, maybe you keep the same things that you have set up, but just talk about that more. Because I think that is something that people would appreciate. Like, again, for like the Mud Peddlers,
I've been doing it in silence for like 5 years, I'm not gonna lie. This is the first time I've talked about it.
I think, and I think that's actually, to me... That's actually interesting. I should have thought of this earlier, but I didn't think of it either. But, like, those kind of decisions are really important, I think, to talk about, because, it's kind of like when artists will talk about, like, all of the packing materials that I use are made with, recycled and, or upcycled materials.
Right.
That is an important decision-making part of the process that communicates our ethics and our morals as creators. And I think if you articulated that more, that could maybe... help people be like, I want to contribute to this person on Patreon because they are actively taking a monetary hit to make my free experience better.
That's what's really important to me, is that the experience and the knowledge you get from me has a certain vibe to it, as to where it grows, it facilitates a growth for your artistic experience. Like, yes, I could totally do an episode on, like, I watched the Great Pottery Throwdown and we're going to replicate what they're doing. Like, that'd be cool. But, like, that doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't really teach you anything except for...
Depending on how you, if you could do that and then share the process of, like, your creative process, and that could be helpful. But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, people ask me to do that all the time, and I'm like, I really don't want to, like, coattail another show just for popularity. And I'm not saying that people who do that, I don't know if anyone does that, but I'm not saying, like, people who do that are. It's just, I'm not into making an episode about an episode.
Yeah.
And then calling it content. Like, I want to, like, my last episode I did on YouTube was 5 pro tips on making lids. And I thought they were all really good tips on what things that you would want to know if you started making lidded forms.
Yeah. It
was not a popular video. Over the course of a week, it got 3,000 views.
Really?
Most people are not, this is a crazy thing to say, most people are not at that level. Most people there are more people who like ceramics than who get to the level of making a good jar in ceramics.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Like, most people like teapots. Most people are not making, even the ceramic art field, they're not making teapots.
I don't make teapots.
So, you're right. So even experienced people like yourself. So when you see a video on, like, the 5 tips on making teapots, you kind of think to yourself, like, well, that ain't me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and you're going to skip over that.
Yeah.
So whenever I make content on a higher tier, like advanced or intermediate content, or at least what I call it, I understand when I post it, this is not for the majority of people.
Yeah.
Regardless of being a potter or not. This is for the people who are in a stage of struggling to get to this level. This is not, like, weighing your specific gravity is never going to be for the majority of potters.
Right.
Because the majority of potters don't even make their own glazes. And I'm not trying to talk down anybody or make them feel bad. The numbers are just, that's where they are. Like, if you put 100 potters in a room, 5 of them are making their own glaze. And of them, 2 or 3 of them weigh specific gravity. And needed that video. Yeah. Right? But, like, I'm willing to take that hit to get that information out there. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is, like, the information is more important than how many effing ads you're watching.
Yeah.
And that's why people support me, I think, you know?
Yeah, it's, to me, like, I don't know, to kind of capstone this episode, that makes me think about the challenge of being a creator. So much of it is about balancing what motivates you internally. Like, what are your intrinsic motivations for making this content? Yeah. And, and again, I don't think there's any, realistically, as long as you're not, like, hurting people, I don't think there's any moral judgment on what your motivations are.
Right.
Like, I mean, I don't think, you know, again, in our late stage capitalist nightmare, we're all trying to survive. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with prioritizing your income, because again,
right.
Like,
No, definitely not.
You know, that's what we need. I think it's really interesting the many different ways that people, like, what percentages people give to each thing. Like, what percentage do they give towards the income making aspect of it? Where are they willing to take a hit?
Mm-hmm.
Where are they willing to give 150% when they could give 75 and get the same result?
Right.
And I think that's part of the great thing about exposing yourself to as many different artists and styles and perspectives as possible, is I think the more that you can learn from other people, the more you can determine for yourself what those percentages need to be for you and what works well for you.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's hard because there's a lot. Like that's
yeah.
Like, we're talking about Patreon, but we're also talking about like making in general. So there's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah, but... the monetization aspect has essentially come down to people's attention span. Like, the longer you can keep attention on something, the more money you're gonna make from it. And like, it's hard for me because it's not like I'm trying to fight it, and I think it's hard for a lot of people in the makerspace because I realize it is what it is. But like, I'm more interested in feeding you artistically than I am feeding your eyes. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes a big monetary hit for me, which is why Patreon in general is so important. Yeah. Because the people that realize the ethics behind my work are more interested in that than the attention span thing, are people who are, I wouldn't say more genuine, but they're genuinely trying to water the seed of my ethics rather than kind of just stare at a random tree.
You know, like, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with staring at a random tree, because not gonna lie, like I mean, again, I think that comes down to like what
you're aiming for, I guess.
What you're aiming for, and like also what you want. Because I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with just wanting, like if you're not involved in ceramics at all, or you're involved a little bit, and you just want to appreciate the beauty of a tree.
Yeah, of course.
Versus do the gardening yourself. Like those are two different needs that get met by two different sets of actions.
Absolutely.
And there are as many creators to fulfill each of those needs as there are people on the planet, practically.
I mean, yeah, true. Everybody's a thrown star at this point.
Yeah, I mean, but that's I think in some ways that's the beauty of it, because I think we each get to make that decision for ourselves, and we each get to decide what it is that we want to put out into the world, how we want to illuminate as the individual stars we are.
I also think the content that you make attracts the crowd that you put out there, right? Mm-hmm. So like, the ethics behind my channel are probably going to attract people who have somewhat the same ethics behind making content, or at least amongst people who want to take my content in for a certain, but like, if I showed my ass on screen, I'm probably going to attract people who like looking at man ass. Like that's how that goes. Like, they're going to care a little bit less about my artwork than my booty.
Oh my god.
Okay, we're good. We go now.
Alright, wait.
Wait. Okay.
Kiln plugs. Do you have any shop updates coming up?
I actually just did a shop update, but I only released like 20 pots maximum. It's probably 12 pots. And
okay, so
6 of them are gone.
Okay.
And the ones that are bowls that didn't get bought are going to the Empty Bowls Foundation.
Oh yeah, Empty Bowls.
Yeah, I'm doing that, but I'm just not being as loud about it. Usually I'm like, oh, we're going to do Empty Bowls. I'm just going to do it myself this time.
Yeah, because those videos, you put a lot of effort into those videos that didn't get a lot of
they don't get
traffic.
Nobody cares about charity to that level, but I care about it ethically and internally, so I'm still going to do it.
Yeah. Speaking of which, if you have not heard of Empty Bowls, it's essentially a fundraiser, and it takes place basically across the country, and essentially it's people who can make bowls, or sometimes they do like cups too.
Yeah.
But usually it's ceramic artists who will make bowls and then donate them, and then they're people who attend the fundraiser pay a certain amount. It's to help with food insecurity. And people who go to the events and pay to contribute basically get to pick out a bowl that's been donated by the arts community.
Have you ever seen the poachers there? Like if I'm a fan of Lindsey M Dillon's bowls.
Oh,
right, and I know she's gonna put some bowls in the Empty Bowls. I will be like number 10 in line, and I will skulk the bowl table all day long because I know what your work looks like, and I will actively.
Oh my gosh!
For like a $30 or $40 ticket, I can take home like 2 bowls worth of $80.
Yeah,
and get fed.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like it's oh my god.
Yeah,
I love those people because you can see them sometimes, and you're wondering.
They're like looking at the bottom.
Yes,
looking at the bottom. Looking at the bottom. Yeah.
Looking at the bottom all day long.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
That actually reminds me. My mom was really sweet the other day. She was like, Lindsay, I notice when I go over to people's houses now and I have tea with them or whatever, I look at the cup cups. I look at the bottom of the cups. I'm like, oh, mom. I got my mom looking at the foot of cups.
Yeah,
that's very happy.
That's the thing I try and get across to my classroom, is they're not really exposed to the outside ceramic art culture world.
Mm-hmm.
So there's things that I tell them, like, I'll say something like, man, this clay is really short. And they're like, what does that mean?
Oh, yeah.
Right, and then I have to explain what short clay is.
Right.
And, like, how people use it in just, like, a cultural term. Or, like, looking at the bottoms of things.
Yeah.
Is definitely a pottery culture thing or a ceramic art culture thing. And they're just like... Or, like, a bottle of vinegar is, like, a cultural thing we all do.
Yeah.
But they're like, why? And so I have to explain to them, well, you know, like... dries a bit differently sometimes, and XYZ and XYZ. And so I've had entire classes before. I'm like, here's why potters look at bottoms.
Yep.
You know?
All right, anything else you want to plug?
No.
I want to plug the flow of finances from the middle and lower class to the upper class. I want more...
Ooh, reverse trickle down. Let's go.
Reverse trickle down. I want...
reverse trick.
I want evaporation?
Evaporation economics?
No. Yeah?
EvapX?
EvapX!
Ooh.
Woo, 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 woo.
A new company. Watch out.
Company.
X, regular X. Twitter?
Twex?
I think Twitter's called X now, right?
It is called X,
Which
but
means
I'm going to always call it Twitter because Elon Musk.
Well, when you used to tweet, it used to be called like a twat.
No, you would call it a tweet. And now we call it a sheet. Because X.
Well, I thought it'd be called an excrement.
Yes, that too.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway. All right. Bye.
Bye.
And that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of The Mud Peddlers. We would love to hear from you, so if you want to share your thoughts about the episodes or just see what Donte and I are working on in our studios, come say hi. You can find links to my social media at lindseymdillon.com. That's LINDSEY, M as in monster, DILLON.com.
And you can visit my pottery shop or see what I'm working on at earthnationceramics.com. And you can find me all over social media at Earth Nation Ceramics. It's spelled exactly how you think it's spelled.
And if you want to support the show, hear some bonus episodes, and see some behind the scenes of my work, you can support me and the show at patreon.com/Lindsey M Dillon. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.